What makes a winner is believing in your capacity to define your own path amidst adversity. At SixSox Minds, we believe that each of us have that capability to be a winner. It is a platform that holds true to such values, with extended arms that welcome all, feet firmly rooted to the ground, eyes that hope to see beyond, ears that listen to the sounds of people, nose that smells fear and helps overcome it, and a bright, beautiful face like each of yours that dares to look up, dream, and fly. We believe that learning is a cyclic process that never ends. However, that process can be simple, creative, and fun. Our goal, therefore, is to serve the community, share experiences, learn from one another, and reach beyond. Today, we bring to you our speaker for the day who believes that competitive advantage takes constant maintenance and recreation in order to stay at the top of the game. And who wouldn't like that? With over 40 years of professional experience, yes, you heard me right, with over 40 years of professional experience, including with multinational corporations such as Unilever and Constantia Flexibles, A. Hariharan is a specialist in strategy, strategic analysis, connected strategy, and operational excellence. A corporate advisor, assessor, and trainer with exceptionally high communication skills, he has advised and assisted organizations to exponentially improve their operational effectiveness. A certified independent director, Six Sigma Master Black Belt, and an ISO 9001-2015 lead auditor, Hariharan is a fellow of the Chartered Institute of Marketing, United Kingdom. He is also a distinguished Toastmaster and an engaging speaker who has delivered keynote speeches at various organizations. Ladies and gentlemen, use the virtual icon to put your hands together to welcome A. Hariharan.
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever in the world you are located. And thank you so much for joining us for this session regarding strategy and competitive advantage. Now, a lot of you must have been wondering what this session is going to be all about. And over the course of the next 20 minutes, we'll give you a flavor about one specific aspect of business that is very critical to every organization. Let me first share my screen with you. So please bear with me for a few seconds. The subject of today's session is redefining your competitive advantage, which means a lot of things to a lot of people. All of you have seen penguins. Now, when their iceberg starts melting, penguins jump into the water, swim long distances in the sea, and search for a new iceberg where they can live and where they can find ample supplies of fish. In what is one of the most phenomenal things that you can see on this earth is what is called the annual migration of the wildebeest. About 1.5 million wildebeest, 300,000 zebras, 200,000 antelopes begin their annual migration from the Serengeti in Tanzania to the Masai Mara in Kenya in search of food. It's a distance of 3,000 kilometers, the entire round trip, and they eventually get back and the process starts all over again. Many of them die en route, killed by predators like lions or by crocodiles when they cross the rivers. But for the most part, the majority make it across and return. What this basically means, whether it's the penguins or the wildebeest, is the fact that survival is key and the ability to adapt is crucial. Over the course of the past few weeks, you've seen some of these names which have filed for bankruptcy. Big names, famous names, companies which you never thought would go out of existence or would have financial difficulties of the kinds that they have been facing. And the question that comes to many people's minds is, who else is likely to be in this situation? Over the course of the last few weeks, you also heard of this term called the new normal. And this is something that intrigues me a lot. The word normal, I can understand. The word new, I can understand. But when you say new normal, I begin to wonder, how can a normal be new? Or is it that something has changed so drastically in this world that we need to coin a new term for it? Because change has happened so suddenly over the course of the last 3 months that you need to define that there is something happening in this world that organizations need to be aware of, focused on, and need to do something about how they can ensure their own survival. In this context, I'd like to introduce the term that a lot of people are familiar with, a term that's talked about quite often, and that's called competitive advantage. What does competitive advantage mean? You have the competition aspect, the advantage aspect, but in a very simple way, it basically means what makes an entity's goods or services superior to a customer's other choices. It means that you have organizations, you have products, all competing in the same market. There is one brand or one organization that stands out because it appeals to the customers. And the customer decides what he or she decides to buy. In this context, when you look at competitive advantage, you see some big names, names which have become legends. The iPod, Amazon. You'll be amused to see Shadi.com on that as well. It created waves, didn't it? Wikipedia. Now, these are all big names, and you'd say, all right, all of these have competitive advantages, and therefore they are successful, and therefore they survive. But the fact of the matter is, it's not only these game changers that have a competitive advantage. You can create one too. You can rebuild one too. I'd like to quote a very famous gentleman called Warren Buffett, who all the way back in 1999 talked about how he invests. And the key to investing is not about how the industry is going to affect society, but it's about determining the competitive advantage. And more critically, the durability of that advantage. The advantages come and go. You may have an advantage today, it vanishes tomorrow because somebody else has come in and replaced what you have to offer. And in this rapidly changing world, things happen very quickly. What was your advantage today may not be your advantage tomorrow because somebody else has learned the tricks of the trade. If you've offered some new benefits, somebody matches you. At some point in time in the future, I will describe some famous examples like Intel or Toyota, but that's not the purpose of today's talk. We'll look at that some other time. Now, when we talk about advantage, we start off with a basic premise about something called the value proposition. Value and the value proposition, which fundamentally means what is it that you're going to offer the customer. And when you say what is it that you're going to offer the customer, it translates into what is the customer willing to pay for your product. Think of groceries. You want to go and buy a shampoo. Do you want to buy L'Oreal? Do you want to buy Sunsilk? Or do you want to buy Head and Shoulders? What appeals to you and why do you want to pay that price for a particular brand of your choice? You believe it gives you value. If you have to buy a car, would you buy a BMW? Would you buy a Lexus or would you buy an Audi? Prices may be different. It is what's relevant to you that matters, which is the willingness to pay. And there's the cost to the manufacturer. And the difference between the willingness to pay and the cost is the value created. And the proposition is the value that you're going to offer to the customer. Having said this, we say, all right, you have a competitive advantage. How do you define that advantage? There's a very simple calculation that you can do, which is the willingness to pay minus cost for you, as opposed to willingness to pay minus cost for your strongest competitor. The difference between those two is your competitive advantage. It might sound quite simplistic because you're going to say, how do I find out what is the cost for my competitor? But you're in the business. You have ways of finding out. You have ways of making your own calculations. And if you have a positive number, it means that you have a competitive advantage. Bear this in mind because this is something which is very crucial to businesses and something which a lot of companies do not think about. But it's worth making a bookmark of this and going back to your businesses and seeing how this works. Now, when you create a competitive advantage, you can only create the advantage if you start increasing the gap between the willingness to pay and the cost of the transaction with the customer. How much does it cost you to build that product? How much does it cost you to provide that service? How much does it cost you to reach the customer? And how much is the customer willing to pay? That determines your competitive advantage and determines how successful you're going to be. If you look at a typical transaction, we can break it up into multiple parts. What I call the customer experience, which starts off with recognizing a customer need. A customer has a need for something. Either he's aware of it or he's not, but he has a need. And how does a customer engage in that interaction? So from an organization point of view, recognizing the need. Then comes a request. When I say request, it means the customer is now looking for options. He's deciding on options. He's placing an order. He's paying for the transaction. What role do you play in that entire transaction? And finally, you have responding to that need, where the customer receives the goods, experiences the goods and services. He has a post-purchase experience. So you have these three blocks: recognize, request, and respond, each of which is a potential source of competitive advantage. How good you are and how much better you are compared to your competitor determines how successful you're going to be. And there is this very famous framework which was developed by Michael Porter of Harvard many, many years ago, which has become the kind of benchmark framework for strategy and competitive advantage, which talked about cost and differentiation. Some companies compete on cost, some others compete on differentiation, and some companies attempt to have all of that together. Higher value at the lowest possible cost. And when you look at the dark blue box there, differentiation, that is what makes a company stand out. That is not to say others are not successful. They are too. However, the companies which choose to position themselves in the box of differentiation are the ones usually who are more successful. So when we talk about the new normal, how does competitive advantage operate in the new normal? Now you might think that I'm going to be talking about Corona and the post-Corona situation. It applies, yes, because changes happen quite dramatically. But then what we're talking about now is something that every organization needs to bear in mind on an ongoing basis, needs to review, needs to understand, and needs to be constantly focused on. So ignore Corona for a moment, though some of it may sound as if it is linked to Corona. Fundamentally, you need to define what is your value proposition. What is it that you offer a customer that he or she is willing to pay for? If you don't understand your proposition, then you're starting off at a disadvantage. Having got a perception, you say, all right, keep the willingness to pay and the cost as your parameters. And what you now need to do is create value propositions which are relevant today. What is relevant yesterday may not be relevant today, may not be relevant tomorrow. You need to constantly understand and figure out What is it that people are looking for? You're talking of reviving demand. Now, that applies to post-corona. Yes, it does, because this coronization of the world has imposed tremendous change on everybody and every organization. How do you revive demand? For the first step, what you need to do is go back to your customers and decide very clearly who your prime customers are. You need to segment your client base. You need to understand what is the most profitable areas of your business. You need to increase the speed of your decision making, because the world doesn't wait very long anymore, because change happens so quickly. You need to reboot your operations and your supply chains. Supply chains have become globalized. A lot of companies sometimes don't take advantage of it. Some companies get caught out short because they had not planned the supply chains effectively enough. So this becomes a critical focus. Now, when you go to customers have become a lot more sensitive today. You see it yourself when you go to a grocery, when you go to a supermarket, when you go to a hypermarket, when you want to go to a restaurant. Life has changed. The way you look at it is different. When you reinforce trust with your customers, whether it is a B2C customer or a B2B customer, it is the guarantee of safety of dealing with you as an organization. And I'm not talking about physical safety alone. I'm talking of interactions, trust, reliability. When you reinforce that, customers become a lot more comfortable, and that builds an advantage. You will notice that I've kept the value creation and WTP cost on the left. That's a constant reminder for an organization. And then we come to IT. Typically over the last maybe 10 years, IT is one of those things which is a must-have. Technology, must-have. What is that IT used for? ERP systems, social media, a website. These are all nice things to have. And why do you do it? Everybody is doing it. Do we leverage that? Some do, many don't. They want to be there, but they don't understand, or they don't realize the true potential of that IT presence. We talk about digital marketing, digital presence. How many companies analyze that data? There's so much data available. The analytics that people do, is that used? Increasingly, we will need to be doing that, because there's a lot we can get to know about customers, about the markets. And don't forget, people have got used to operating from home, which is never something which happened earlier. If you ask them 3 months ago, can you work from home? People would look at you in a strange way and say, are you serious? But today, when you say operate from home, it's considered to be acceptable. When that happens, that is when your digital strategies become more critical. And that is when you can start building that advantage vis-a-vis your competitor. Now, if you have to do all these things, there are certain factors which become very, very critical. The first is the need for acceleration. In the past, it took months, years, decades for things to happen. That time is not available because change is taking place very rapidly. And we need to change as organizations to be able to keep pace with what's happening and probably stay one step ahead of our competitors. Remember, advantage? That's why we need to accelerate. There are a lot of things that we want to do. They're nice. I would like to do this, I'd like to do that. What is important is focusing on what really matters. What really matters in terms of what? Your product range, your value proposition, all these things become so very critical. Do you have an appetite for risk? A lot of companies are risk averse. When you're looking at the new world, when you're looking at building advantage, it is helpful to have a slightly higher appetite for risk, because that is what will make you stand out. You've got structures that you've built up over the last 10 years, 50 years, 100 years, say, my organization 100 years old. So what? Need to reevaluate. Is that relevant? If you're talking of people working from home, maybe some people need to be at home. If you're talking of large offices, You can give up valuable real estate and operate in a different way and invest that money in digital infrastructure. And finally, get future ready, because the future is not going to wait for you. It's going to be there. And if your competitor is smart enough, he's going to beat you. And this is how you need to create your competitive advantage. Reassess your competitive advantage and always be aware that this is not something that you prepare as a strategy file and keep it in the office of the CEO, where only he sees it, nobody else does. Everybody is part of this process. And at the root of it, connect. The customers are there. You are there. You need to keep that connection going, because if you don't, somebody else will. And the customer would like you to be connected, digitally or otherwise. Because at the end of the day, the one who's faster and better and more credible is the one who's likely to succeed. Just like it happens here. It's the survival and the ability to adapt. Organizations need to focus on this constantly, which is the way forward. Thank you very much, and I look forward to hearing questions.